Hi, my name is Jessica Berstrom, and I'd like to talk with you about the rhetorical triangle. Now, these days, a lot of high school students are learning about rhetoric and rhetorical analysis because the SAT has made that the method of writing that needs to be used on the optional SAT essay. So a lot of students have learned this in high school now. So for a lot of students, this will be a review, but I'm hoping that there's some things that I can share that will still be new and useful. So here we have our triangle, and the three components of any rhetorical situation. And a rhetorical situation is some context in which there's communication. So rhetorical situation is any case in which there is rhetoric, and the definition of rhetoric is text with a purpose. So the three components of the rhetorical triangle are the writer, the speaker, the creator, the rhetor. That's the term for the person delivering or creating or otherwise transmitting the text. There's also the audience. Those are the viewers or readers or listeners. And there's the text itself. And each of these components of the rhetorical triangle also corresponds with one of the three rhetorical appeals. So the rhetor corresponds with ethos or an ethical appeal. The audience corresponds with pathos or pathos, or a pathetic appeal. And the text corresponds with logos, or a logical appeal. So ethos means an appeal to credibility. Now, what makes a rhetor credible? Well, that depends on the context, right? It's not true. It's not the same in every situation. There's not only one type of credibility. So for instance, if I am teaching a class and maybe it's a law school class, I might show up on the first day of class wearing a business suit because that might appeal to my credibility with my audience. And see, this is why the rhetorical triangle is not just 3 points. There's these lines that are connecting the points because these three components are connected. So what makes the rhetor appear credible depends to some extent on what the audience in that particular rhetorical situation is going to find credible. So let me stop right there and define pathos or pathos. And I've heard it pronounced both ways. They're both correct. So pathos is an appeal to belief, to beliefs, values, ethics. And this is, of course, where you see that overlap with ethos, right? Because ethos looks like the word ethics, right? It's about credibility. And certainly if someone is ethical, then that would make them credible. That would make them more believable, more trustworthy. But what constitutes ethics? What would be appropriate values or beliefs? Well, that depends on your audience. Right now, if I'm talking to a bunch of children in a Christian youth group, then there would be a different belief system, a different value system. And I probably wouldn't want to wear a business suit because that also wouldn't necessarily make me credible with that particular audience. You know, really, to some extent, what makes you credible with your audience is what you have in common with them. And so, again, this is why ethos and pathos, the rhetor and the audience, they're connected. Because the more like my audience I appear, And the more I show that I share the same values that they do, which in different contexts could be education, it could be experience, you have to think about how you as a rhetor want to present yourself in order to best appeal to your audience, in order to establish relevant ethos, in addition to making an argument that is based upon their particular beliefs, values, and ethics. And again, all of these are connected because to some extent, the distinctions among them are artificial. There are some things that I would say would probably count more as logos or as ethos or as pathos, depending on the situation and what they are and things like that. But this is a good place to start. It's a good understanding of these appeals. And the reason that we learn about this is twofold. On the one hand, you learn about it so that when you are the audience, when you are viewing or reading or hearing, encountering someone else's text, you can recognize the appeals that they're making. What are they doing to try to be credible? One of my favorite examples of this is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham Jail. And in the first paragraph, he starts it by talking about how he normally doesn't respond to all the many criticisms that cross his desk. Because if he did, his secretaries would not have time for anything else. Now, that seems like a throwaway statement, or maybe it's flattering his primary audience, his explicit audience, which is the ministers that he is addressing this letter to, who have criticized him, right? However, it's actually an ethical appeal, because he's pointing out that he gets many criticisms, which really suggests that he's making an impact. He's making a difference. If people are actually reaching out to him, or they're complaining, they're criticizing, then what he's doing matters. And people care enough to reach out with their opinions, right? But also he mentions that he has multiple secretaries. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have any secretaries. And even if I did, I'd be lucky to have one, but more than one, like, you have to be pretty important to have multiple secretaries. So he's establishing his credibility from the very beginning, while also flattering his audience that he's giving enough credence to their complaints that he's actually responding to them, or he's pretending to respond to them, except the letter actually was sent to be published in newspapers rather than being mailed directly to these clergy people. So the purported audience is the clergymen, but he's actually writing to the public. He's writing for the benefit of the public, right? Even though it's not explicitly addressed to them. But by saying my fellow clergymen in the very first line, he's also making a pathetic appeal to his audience's values in a primarily Christian country by reminding people that he too is a clergyman. Now, logical appeals are what we typically think of as convincing. So let me follow the same structure as everything else. So logos are appeals to logic. So this could include things like expert testimony. If you personally are an expert, if you have experience in the subject, then your personal experience could in fact count as logic. And that also, by the way, would make you a more credible source, right? That would also contribute to your ethos if you are educated or experienced in what you're talking about. So again, this is why these are connected, right? It could also include things like statistics, the results of some research, things like that. So expert testimony would be things like quotations from other credible sources. But then here's the thing. So also in Letter from Birmingham Jail, King cites a lot of other sources, but he's in jail when he's doing this. So all of these quotations that he includes are from memory. It shows that he's a well-read, well-informed, educated man, and that he is so familiar with these ideas that he's able to quote them from memory. So they're logical appeals, right? But they also count as ethical appeals at the same time. And again, that's why these are connected. Now, if you need to do a rhetorical analysis, you could characterize them either as logical appeals or as ethical appeals, as long as you explained why you were characterizing them that way in a way that speaks to the definitions of ethos, pathos, or logos as appropriate. And that's the idea. It's never enough to just say, somebody does this and that counts as this type of rhetorical appeal. You have to explain why you think it counts that way so that you convince your audience that you know what you're talking about, and you also convince them to agree with you, right? The other reason it's valuable to learn this stuff is in your own argumentative writing. When you are not just reading or hearing or seeing somebody else's text, but you are in fact creating one yourself. It doesn't matter what would make the argument convincing for you. It doesn't necessarily even matter why you believe what you believe. And in fact, you don't have to agree with your argument. What you need to do is think about your purpose, right? Rhetoric is text with a purpose. So you need to think about your purpose and what will achieve your purpose with your audience. What would appeal to them? What are their beliefs, their values? What are their experiences? What kinds of logical appeals would be appropriate for your purpose? And how do you want to present yourself based on the context, right? Based on your goal, based on the text, based on your audience and what you know about them in order to convince them. I hope that this was helpful, and I appreciate your attention.